Hi everyone and welcome to one more episode of the Allplane Podcast, where we talk with the movers and shakers that are redefining the future of commercial aviation. This episode, by the way, after a brief parenthesis imposed by a rather hectic conference and writing schedule these last few weeks. But anyway, as usual, before we start, I would like to remind you that all previous episodes of this podcast, as well as many other aviation stories, are available on the Allplane website. That's Allplane.tv, Allplane.tv, and you can also subscribe to the Allplane newsletter, where I curate and send out every few days basically a roundup of all the major stories in innovation and sustainability in the aviation industry. Now, today we turn our attention to a very large part of the world, which is on its way to become the largest air travel market actually, and that is also seeing significant moves in the advanced air mobility and sustainable aviation space. I am talking about Asia, or Asia Pacific, as is usually referred to in industry reports and publications. To do so, we are joined by Joshua Ng, Director of Alton Aviation Consultancy, who is joining us from Singapore, where he is based. This episode was recorded shortly after Joshua's participation in the Sustainable Aviation Futures Congress APAC, which took place in Singapore in November 2024. There, Joshua shared a panel on aviation decarbonization with representatives of Bloomberg New Energy Finance, Air New Zealand, Vertical Aerospace, and the Plug and Play Tech Center. Joshua and his team work every day with customers across the commercial aviation ecosystem, so this has provided him with a great vantage point to see beyond the noise and buzz and the headlines that are so common in this industry, what are the real and most pressing concerns of CEOs and other decision makers in the aviation industry. Electrification, hydrogen, sustainable aviation fuel. What are the technologies that those that have budgets to invest are focusing their attention on? And what are the main hopes and concerns when it comes to the industry's ongoing sustainable transition? We're going to speak about all this with Joshua. And also, I won't miss the chance to ask him about China, a country with the capacity to really move the needle in areas such as sustainable aviation fuel production and eVTOL development, but also a market that is relatively hard to follow from afar. So let's go into today's episode and hear what Joshua has to say about all these questions. Hello, Joshua. How are you?
Good. Nice to meet you, Miguel.
Yeah, likewise. We're going to touch upon quite a few interesting topics that you guys at Alton are working on. But I would like to start first with a short introduction. If you could please tell us a little bit about yourself and your role at Alton, that would be amazing.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Joshua Ng. I'm a director at Alton Aviation Consultancy. We are a boutique aviation management consulting firm, and we work across the entire aviation value chain. I am based in the Singapore office, where I'm a director, and I lead the office here in Singapore. I cover the Asia Pacific region, but also have a global mandate to look at technology and mobility for the firm. And what this means is to look at the future of aviation, where aviation will be in 20, 30, 40 years, and how industry has to adapt and evolve to meet some of those emerging requirements that aviation will face in the future.
Yeah, actually, when I got introduced to you through a common friend, and I checked what the work you guys do in this field of future of aviation, and particularly the very pressing topic now of decarbonization, I got immediately interested because I think you guys have a very good vantage point of everything that's going on. And as one of the leading consulting firms specialized in the aviation industry, I thought it would be really interesting to have your perspective about what's going on in this industry at the moment. Particularly being based in Singapore, I guess you have a pretty good insight on what's going on in the Asia Pacific region. I'm based in Europe, so for me it's a bit more difficult to follow everything that's going on there, but obviously it's going to be it is, and it's going to be even more a very important region for aviation, well, for the whole global economy, but in aviation particularly. I don't know if it's already the largest, but on its way to become the largest air travel market in the world. So in this conversation, we can touch upon all the different fields in which things are happening right now in aviation. We have sustainable aviation fuels, and we have advanced air mobility, and so on. But first of all, maybe it's best if you tell us a bit more about Alton. We obviously just heard about you, about your role there, but tell us a bit more about the company and the sort of project you specialize in.
Yeah, so at Alton, we are a full-service aviation management consulting firm. We work across the entire aviation value chain. So that means the major segments like airlines, airports, the OEM market, the aftermarket, the leasing industry. Those are some of the key pillars of the aviation value chain that we work in. But we also focus on the smaller ones like business aviation, cargo, and we also work with fuel providers as well, specifically on those that supply fuel into the aviation ecosystem. We have been working with the traditional aviation, as we would like to call it, so the strategics that are currently working in the sector today. But we're also working with the startups and the emerging leaders for the future. And this might be eVTOL OEMs, this might be hydrogen aircraft OEMs, this might be sustainable aviation fuel producers. All of them are thinking about how to decarbonize and how to evolve aviation to be more sustainable. And sustainability can come in many different forms. It could be the financial sustainability. That's of course what we have always been measuring ourselves against companies in the private sector. But increasingly with the mandates around environmental sustainability, we are also seeing airlines, airports, and actually the entire aviation ecosystem evolve as well to try and achieve those mandates, whether through regulatory compliance, but also because passengers and the traveling public are demanding that the aviation decarbonize as well. So we sit at an intersection, a very interesting intersection between traditional and new, and we're helping the traditional players evolve themselves to be something that can tap on the opportunities in the new. And for those in the new sectors, right, to understand how aviation works. And so to be able to comply with the rules and the regulations that are in place for the safety of and well-being of the passengers in the air today.
Yeah, actually, since this podcast is very focused on innovation and sustainability, I would like to dig a bit deeper into this particular aspect of the work you guys do at Alton. We are now, as you mentioned, at a very interesting moment because it seems that the industry is a bit at a crossroads where there are all these different paths open to comply with demand from both from governments and increasingly from the public as well to become more sustainable. But there's a lot of uncertainty about what is the ideal path. Maybe all of them will play a role. We have obviously sustainable aviation fuel, electric, hydrogen, and then we also have different new business models and new types of aircraft coming to the market, like the advanced air mobility, eVTOL ones. What is your view at Alton? If I don't know if you have a view on whether there might be a winning technology when it comes to decarbonization. And maybe we can later move on to the topic of advanced air mobility, because I think that's a wall on itself. I know there are very opposed views. Some people are very pro, and some others are very skeptical about the prospects of this new segment of the industry. But let's start maybe by sustainability. Do you guys have, let's say, a winner, not a winner, but do you see one of the proposed technologies as a winner in the next few years and even decades?
I think that's a very interesting topic, and the way that we have tried to look at the technology and the business feasibility of these technologies is the conclusion that we have, unfortunately, is there's no silver bullet to help decarbonize aviation. I think the choice of technology being used as the future energy source, so that being sustainable aviation fuels, electricity, or hydrogen, or even perhaps newer other kind of energy sources like ammonia, right? These involve a series of trade-offs between different aircraft performance properties. We see sustainable aviation fuel as a drop-in fuel that can power the fleet of aircraft that are in operation today. However, there are issues with the amount of supply available for these bio feedstocks. Of course, the holy grail here is that you can have power to liquid fuel, right, which is energy that is derived from CO2 in the air. But of course, the technology is still quite nascent and very expensive at this point. So there is a strong demand push for SAF, but at the right price, right? I think if we look at different energy sources, electricity or hydrogen, these are more novel technologies. These require new regulations, new aircraft to be developed to accommodate these technologies. And so this will be, 5, 10 years out before they will reach the commercialization phase. Each have their own issues. Electric aviation, primarily related to the batteries being too heavy, the energy density being too light. And I think that limits the range profile of a lot of these aircraft that can be operated. Hydrogen is a flammable fuel source, so that requires a different kind of storage mechanism to make sure that the fuel is contained safely. I think that will be one of the primary drivers of whether or not we see hydrogen aircraft, is the ability to make sure that the flights are actually safe to fly. And as such, right, there's going to be an unclear path um, towards a single source of fuel in the future. But I think at this point, research and development is needed just to figure out how we can advance technology to a point where then we can make those decisions on technology choices, if we should, or if we should continue on different development paths.
But is it economically feasible to have different technologies coexisting, considering the, let's say, huge economies of scale here? So right now, for example, like you can go all over the world and you have the same infrastructure, the same type of infrastructure, which is compatible with pretty much all the aircraft that are out there flying. If you start to fragment that into smaller niches, wouldn't there be an issue then economically for the operators and also for the infrastructure providers? And having all this infrastructure duplicated or triplicated to cater to all these different technological approaches. I don't know if that's feasible economically, or there has to be one prevailing technology, talking about the medium and long term here.
Yeah, I think you raise a good point, right? Infrastructure is as critical as the aircraft that are going to fly around the world. We do think that there are going to be challenges at the airport specifically. Hydrogen storage, particularly given that it's flammable, and also adapting the electrical grid such that you can uplift a significant amount of electricity on short duration, right, to power a big aircraft. But I think what we can say is this, right? We know that today we are using fossil fuel, so sustainable aviation fuel generally should be a drop-in source as well from an infrastructure perspective. Whether or not we go with electricity or hydrogen, I think the question here is around the ability to bring it into the plane. But even if we don't bring it into the plane, both these sources will be important for other users, right, on land, whether it's to power cars, whether it's power buses or the rail system, right, for electricity or hydrogen. So we do think that regardless of the application, regardless of the energy source that will become the dominant choice in the aircraft, right? Building those infrastructure will still be necessary regardless if the world is going towards decarbonization.
But you will still have on the operator side, a bit of a dilemma there because, for example, for fleet commonality and maintenance, operational purposes, it's going to be difficult for a given airline, for example, if it's already difficult to manage different types of aircraft that use more or less the same technology and in some cases even the same engines and the same fuel. That's going to be really complicated for an operator to plan to do fleet planning, operational planning, and financially as well, if get the right scale and everything, if you have all these technologies available there. I don't know if you get these type of questions from your customers in the industry, whether they should be planning, let's say, 2-3 decades ahead, like the typical useful life of an aircraft. What sort of planning they should be putting in place in case one of these technologies or 2 or 3 of them actually become commonplace in the future. Is this something your customers ask? Are they doing some planning ahead considering this?
Yeah, I think the way that I see it is the airlines are going to purchase these aircraft, right? So they will be the primary operator of these aircraft. Given where the production issues, the supply chain issues are today, they're actually more focused on today's issues in securing aircraft for today. But that being said, I think a lot of the airlines around the world are starting to recognize that they need to decarbonize. So there are two main measures they're trying to do that today. The first is to be more fuel efficient, right? From an operating perspective, they're trying to use less fuel today on the existing aircraft to get there. Of course, we recognize that they're not going to get to zero. And so that's where the new aircraft come into play. What we have generally recognized from an airline perspective is airlines are price takers in terms of fuel. They don't have a choice in terms of what fuel sources because the other industries, right, generally consume a lot more fuel than aviation. And so whatever fuel choices they might have based on the future aircraft designs, they will not have that many choices in terms of whether it's going to be SAF or if it's going to be electricity or hydrogen, right? It will be determined by what the aircraft OEMs put out. But where we see a lot more questions is in the airport space. I think airports being the ground infrastructure for where airplanes, aircraft take off and land and park. That's where they are more concerned because they do need to prepare for the 20 or 30-year plan. I think right now what we're seeing is that there's a lot of business as usual kind of processes, but in the background, we do see in the airport master planning domain, there are more questions being asked around how should we think about the future aircraft designs and energy requirements? Where can we build such energy storage requirements on the airport premise, and how do we pipe that or distribute that to the aircraft? So those questions are emerging. Of course, these are all at the planning stage at this moment because no hydrogen aircraft or electric aircraft have been certified. But as they do, I think we'll start to see a lot more accelerated planning and development at airports to help them achieve the ability to service those aircraft.
You're based in Singapore,
Mhm.
and you do quite a lot of work in the Asia Pacific region. Now, what is the perception in the Asian aviation industry about the whole topic of decarbonization? I mean, as I mentioned earlier, I'm based in Europe, where this has been a pretty hot topic in the industry for quite a while. I don't know if this is also a shared perspective in Asia as a region of growth for the industry and also with the sort of massive markets that you have there. We have seen a number of sustainable aviation fuel deals recently in some countries. But what is the general perception, talking here in the public sphere, but you talk with many people in the industry, operators, etc. Is this really a major topic right now in the industry in your region?
Yeah, I think it depends on the countries that are in question because Asia is a very big region. It spans developed countries and developing countries and everyone in between. So I think the policy stance at a country level is quite different. We do see some front runners in terms of leaders in sustainability. Australia, New Zealand being one in the Australasia region, Singapore and here in Southeast Asia, and in North Asia, Japan, Korea are also quite advanced and they're thinking about sustainability. Where I think there is quite an interesting discussion or conversation going on is in China. Right? I think China recognizes the need to decarbonize and to import less fuel, and they have set their industry priorities to focus on that. I think first with solar, but now increasingly with battery electric technology. And that could extend beyond what they are doing today in the automotive space into aviation as well. I think you see that happening with some of the eVTOL designs that they're putting out, which uses electricity as the primary energy source. But coming back to the sustainability topic, Michael, look, I mean Europe is the front runner here. There's a lot of investments, a lot of government support and policies to encourage or even to make industry comply with the decarbonization policies is a bit more loose here in Asia, so we don't see as much development. But I do think perceptions are starting to change. Singapore has one of the largest SAF plants recently inaugurated, right, by Neste. I
And a
think we also,
mandate, yeah. You have also
yeah,
also set up a mandate, a SAF mandate recently for flights departing Singapore, I think.
there is a SAF mandate as well. So there's going to be a purchasing SAF purchasing kind of authority, right?
Hmm.
Set up by the government to help manage that. Um, One at the same time while moving the aviation industry towards decarbonization, but at the same time also ensuring a level playing field for all the airlines that are competing and flying through Singapore. So I think that's something interesting that's happening here in Singapore. I think where we also see other governments kind of supporting Australia and New Zealand being two at the forefront. Australia, I think we have seen some developments between Qantas and Airbus trying to set up a SAF industry in Australia. The Australian government has also funded some SAF programs right in the country as well. And New Zealand, I think New Zealand has been always trying to punch its above its weight, right? It's a lot of green technology startups setting up or demonstrating and doing testing in the country. And I think also trying to embrace the whole green and sustainability angle as well. The list goes on, right? I think there are other regions and other governments that are also doing its part. And too many to name on the
Yeah.
podcast today.
Yeah, but you mentioned China, which is interesting because I had here in my notes, it's one of the countries I wanted to ask you about because I don't know. I mean, I've been following the Chinese electric aviation space a little bit, particularly in the advanced air mobility side. It's one of the countries, obviously, that it's ahead of the curve when it comes to eVTOLs. But what about the mainstream aviation? I don't know if does China have right now any sort of sustainable aviation fuel policy? Are there any mandates or is there any significant activity in scaling up or setting up sustainable aviation fuel production at the moment in China? Because it's one of those countries that can really move the needle when it
Mm.
comes to scaling up a specific technology.
Yeah, I think that was a recent initiative. It's actually a pilot program, so perhaps not quite the full-scale demonstration that we're looking for, right? Where several airports, including several of the key airlines like China Southern, China Eastern, and Air China, coming together to initiate a sustainable aviation fuel pilot project at several airports. I think it's going to be a start, and hopefully this will continue with more concerted demonstrations and eventually with China actually starting something on the SAF front.
Yeah, well, the area where China has seen a lot of activity is advanced air mobility, which is one of the fields that you guys are also covering at Alton. What is
Mhm.
your view on this industry? Because there is controversy, I would say, even among industry analysts and experts. Some people are very bullish, some people are very bearish. The last few weeks, we have seen a number of major eVTOL developers getting in trouble. The bearish side is kind of feeling vindicated, but there's also the long-term trend here about some of these developers also getting ahead, particularly in the US. In China, I know much less, but I've seen there are quite a few interesting projects as well. Do you have a view at Alton about what's the future of this industry and what is the financial and economic potential of the advanced air
Mhm.
mobility industry?
Yeah, so we do have a view that the electric eVTOL market certainly is something that is interesting. It's so quite a bit of novel technology packaged into a single machine. Loosely, you could consider it a vertical takeoff, a helicopter, right? Electric helicopter, but at the same time, it has the ability to go forward with some aerodynamic effects through its wing, right? So that could open up a potentially new way of traveling within the city or between cities. I think we do have a slightly more conservative view on how the industry could develop, right? I think when we put out our forecast and put out our numbers, we do see this firstly as a replacement program for some of the helicopters that are out there today. But we also do see the potential for outsized growth if the technology proves itself to be very economical to use, something that you and I can use on daily commutes, right? Between the work and the airport, for example, or from your workplace to the home. So that's the use case of how we see eVTOLs on the passenger side, but also we do expect that the cargo use case will be a bit more in the forefront. I think what we have seen is in the drone space that drones have been transporting cargo today already, right, between hubs and rural areas. And I think it's not far-fetched to believe that in the future, larger and larger volumes of cargo can be transported by eVTOLs, right, capable of carrying hundreds of kilos of payload.
Do you have a specific time frame in mind about how this advanced air mobility rollout might happen? Because we are seeing also some of these leading eVTOL developers pushing for some early start, maybe even 2026, the boldest ones, but maybe that's a bit too short. Some people are saying maybe it's more realistic to aim for 2027, 28, even longer periods of time.
Mhm.
What do you think is going to happen? You think we're going to have to wait still for quite a few years for this to become a more mainstream thing? I'm not talking now about maybe some demonstration flight here and there, but of this being
Mhm.
something that is out there on a regular basis. Or we can expect it to happen faster than that, because we also have the precedent of some technologies that it takes a long time to develop, but once it's there, boom, it's immediately adoption rate is really quick.
Yeah. So I think this will be a crawl, walk, run type of initiative. I think there are some commitments in the Middle East, in Dubai and Abu Dhabi for next year. Might be slipped to 2026, who knows? But I think those will be some of the early starters for early commercial starts, right, for the industry. I do expect, we do think that it will take a while before it actually takes off and goes to become what you call mainstream. Just because I think most of the cities or most of the OEMs want to be more cautious in its approach, making sure that it performs well on a few routes, increase the frequency, increase the volumes to stress test it on those few routes before expanding that to more routes across the city landscape. I think that's also a way to bring down costs more quickly, right? If you have frequency, if you have volume of customers, I think that helps a lot as well.
What about again, the perspective from the Asia Pacific region? We have China has been already conducting some trial tests in the Guangzhou area. I don't know if Singapore has also some sort of program or
Mhm.
project. Japan is also pretty active in the field of eVTOL, investing with some Japanese companies investing in some of the leading programs. Besides the Middle East, do you see Asia as being another sort of launchpad for advanced air mobility? And what factors would be needed for Asia to take a lead in this advanced air mobility?
Yeah, I think if we talk about Asia, I think we cannot hide away from China, right? China is the only country today which has certified two different eVTOL OEMs aircraft, the EHang as well as the Autoflight models. It is not anywhere near what we would term mainstream right now. The regulators are also trying to understand how to make sure that it's safe to operate and operated safely, right? But I think the whole push within China is quite favorable for eVTOLs. They have a concept called the low altitude economy, right? There's a government policy to help develop this emerging industry in its 14th 5-year plan. And I think what we see is that increasingly they're starting to develop the policies, the procedures to ensure both the aircraft to operate safely, right, and then the aerodrome safety as well, and the public safety as well. So that will be an interesting space to watch. I think we're going to see both the passenger use case, but I think more increasingly so the cargo use case in China, given that it's a bit more less risky, right, to operate cargo flights rather than passenger flights. So it's a very unique way to kickstart and jumpstart this industry in China. Elsewhere in Asia, I think Korea and Japan are the other two areas, other two countries where there might be considered front runners. Both countries have OEMs, right, developing eVTOLs. A lot of them affiliated with the auto manufacturers, right? I think that's where they draw a lot of the technology and innovation from. But also having the demonstration programs, right? In Korea, you have the KUM Grand Challenge um, to operate flights on Jeju Island, and also between the Seoul Airport, Incheon, as well as the city center. In Japan, I think emerging use cases around passenger, cargo, and medical transport, not within the Tokyo area, but not only within the Tokyo area, but also considering some of the rural areas within Japan, given that, its island archipelago tends to lend itself to some of these services, especially for the rural communities.
And what needs to happen? What sort of, let's say, requirements need to be in place for advanced air mobility to become widely accepted? Are there risks or some opposition in the areas where this technology could potentially be deployed? What is the public perception at the moment in Asia about advanced air mobility? Or you think it's going to be more of a smooth ride because those are societies that are ready to embrace technological change more than maybe other parts of the world?
Yeah, I think at this point it's a bit less certain, right? I think in Europe and US, there's certainly been a lot more studies being conducted and surveys being done. I think in Asia, I think there's a bit less of that. But regardless, I think the population, especially if you look at China, right, the way they're developing it, they're starting with drones that deliver food from a hub to your nearest kind of delivery center, right? So the buzzing of drones in the air is getting common in these trial cities. And I think that if that extends towards eVTOL operations, I think people will understand and see the benefit and the use cases that can emerge from them. I think that might be a model that would work or could work, right, to help assuage the public that these operations are generally safe. They are going to be part of the city fabric, right, in terms of transportation options. And that you might one day fly on it because, it's an affordable option that can be used by the masses. I think when you get all of that in place, I think you start to see a change in mindsets, a change in behaviors where people will start to accept it rather than reject it at first glance.
So we have all these advanced air mobility developments, but how do you think this could somehow connect with the more mainstream air travel? We have seen a few airlines investing in eVTOLs. For example, AirAsia is one of the airlines that has expressed its interest in that. I don't know if you see eVTOLs becoming, let's say, a complement to the airlines' mainstream operations in some way.
Yeah, these will be very different segments for the airlines. And I think what the airlines are trying to do is to try and capture as much of the value chain of passengers' travel expenses, right? Trip costs or trip expenses. So this extends not just from the airport to airport journey, but from the home to airport or airport to or work to airport kind of journey as well. I think that's where they're trying to find partners rather than operating a lot of these aircraft by themselves. I think the proposition seems sound, right, to extend the value chain across the entire trip. But I think most of the airlines are also cautious and making sure that they put their investment dollars in the right places. to ensure that it does not distract from their core passenger operations of flying A320s or 737 aircraft.
Well, we'll see. I mean, it's going to be a few interesting years ahead, I think, for
It will
everyone
be, yeah.
in
Mhm.
aviation. Just to wrap it up, if people wish to learn more about Alton and the work you do in consulting and analyzing the industry, where should they go? What's their website or other digital channels they can check?
Yeah, we do publish articles regularly on our company website, altonaviation.com. There's a section on the website dedicated to insights, and you'll see all the insights that we have from prior years, whether it's talking about urban air mobility, advanced air mobility, eVTOLs, all the way to aircraft, airlines, airports, you name it. That will probably be the most reliable source of information for anyone interested in the sector. We also do regularly attend conferences. We don't have any plan for the rest of the year, but certainly in the new year, I'm sure you'll see us at a conference near you.
Great. Well, I hope we are able to coincide at some point in the same place and meet in
Mhm.
person. We're having this conversation now remotely halfway across the world, but that's what conferences are for, to meet in person. Very good. So thank you so much, Joshua, for your time today and for giving us your perspective as an aviation expert. And I'm going to be adding the links to your report on the show notes. And yeah, so thank you so much, and hopefully meet at one of these conferences soon.
Yep, sounds good. And same to you as well. Hopefully, we can see each other in a not so distant future.
Thank you. Bye. If you like this podcast, you can support us by giving it a great rating on Apple, Spotify, or whichever platform you get it from. And remember, you can, of course, subscribe to it. And you can also get regular updates through the Allplane website. That's allplane.tv. We have a newsletter where we cover the aviation industry every week with a special focus on innovation and sustainability. So give it a go. Thank you and goodbye.